My sister said family doesn't charge family for wedding planning, so I sent her an invoice for $11,000. Now the whole family is calling me greedy. The phone rang at 7:40 in the morning, and I already knew what was coming. My sister's voice cracked through the speaker, sharp and furious. $11,000? Are you serious right now? I'd spent 2 months planning her entire wedding for free, the venue, the flowers, the vendors, while she added more and more, assuming my time cost nothing. So I finally sent her exactly what I would have charged any stranger. By that afternoon, my whole family was calling me greedy, accusing me of tearing everyone apart over money. What none of them expected was the document I sent next, proof of everything I'd given and everything they'd taken. What happened after that changed how my entire family saw me. Olivia Bennett had spent 6 years building Magnolia and Oak Events into something that was entirely hers, a narrow brick storefront on King Street, 31 weddings booked for the year, a waitlist she'd earned through 70-hour weeks and relentless attention to detail. The late afternoon light slanted gold through her office windows that March, catching the edges of seating charts pinned to the corkboard behind her desk. She had built something real out of nothing, something nobody could call a hobby. So when her phone buzzed with her sister's name, she felt the familiar tightening in her chest before she even answered. Liv, Marcus and I finally picked a date. October 17th. Since you do this for a living, you could just handle everything. You know how stressed I get with details. Olivia set down her pen. Across the office, her assistant, Sophie Carter, glanced up with the expression of someone bracing for impact. Hannah, I'd love to help, but I have a full client roster, and if I take this on properly, we'd need to talk about... Oh my God, Liv, you're my sister. I'm not going to pay you. That would be so weird. The words landed with the sting of a conclusion that had never been in question. This was not new territory. The car Olivia detailed for free before Hannah's dates. The staging photos she'd shot for Hannah's apartment listing, refusing payment because Hannah insisted family didn't charge family. Each time felt small. Each time accumulated into something with no name that sat heavily in Olivia's chest anyway. A wedding is a little different from a car detail, Hannah. It's not that different. I already told Mom you said yes. There it was. Their mother brought in before Olivia could object, so refusing wasn't just refusing Hannah, but refusing the whole family's expectation. Olivia had been the responsible one since she was 9, since their father's layoff had quietly reorganized the household around money worries nobody explained to the children. Hannah, 4 years younger, had been protected from that anxiety. Olivia had absorbed it instead, learned early that being useful was a kind of safety. Liv, please. Nobody else understands my vision like you do. I don't have anyone else. Sophie mouthed silently. You okay? Olivia wasn't sure, but she heard herself say, Okay, I'll help. You're doing the invoice thing this time, right? Sophie asked once the call ended. It had become a running joke between them, the hypothetical bill Olivia floated every few months for the unpaid labor she performed in the name of love. It's a wedding, Soph. I can't invoice my sister. But the thought lodged itself somewhere and didn't leave. That evening Olivia drove to her parents' house in Mount Pleasant for what her mother Diane called a quick dinner to celebrate. Walter asked about Olivia's business for exactly as long as it took to pour the wine. Diane asked if she was seeing anyone, received a no, and pivoted to how lovely it was that Hannah had found Marcus so young. Hannah pulled up a Pinterest board, scrolling through 200 images she expected to materialize at full professional quality for free. I really want that hanging floral installation over the head table. I saw one that cost like $3,000. But you could make something just as good for way less, right? That installation alone would run $2,000 in materials before labor. Right. But you wouldn't charge for labor. It's family. Diane nodded approvingly. Walter didn't look up from his steak. Something small and hard settled into place in Olivia's chest. Not anger yet. Recognition. Her time, her expertise, valued at exactly zero, simply because of which daughter's needs had always counted in this house. She thought of the 8-hour days she spent on site visits for strangers who paid invoices within 5 business days without complaint, who thanked her in handwritten cards after the wedding, who understood instinctively that good work cost money. Her own family had never once extended her that same basic courtesy. "How many guests?" Olivia asked, pulling out her phone to take notes, professional habit overriding discomfort. "Like 200 with Marcus's family." 200 guests. Full floral program, catering coordination, vendor contracts, a day of timeline, likely a welcome event. This wasn't a favor. It was a 60 to 80-hour project before the wedding day itself, plus a 16-hour execution day. Olivia had clients paying $8,000 for less. "I'll need vendor budgets from you and Marcus. October is 7 months out, which is tight for something this size." "You're amazing," Hannah said, already scrolling to the next picture. "I knew I could count on you." Driving home, Olivia replayed the dinner in pieces. Hannah's easy assumption, her mother's nod, her father's silence, which was its own kind of agreement. She thought about something a former client had once said, almost offhand: "People treat your time the way you teach them to treat it." She pulled into her driveway and sat in the dark car for a long moment. Somewhere in 6 years of building her business, she had learned that expertise had value, that labor deserved compensation. She charged strangers fairly and without apology. She had never once allowed a paying client to treat her work the way her own family treated it constantly. She picked up her phone and opened a blank document. At the top, she typed "Magnolia and Oak Events, Wedding Coordination Estimate." She didn't send anything that night, but she didn't delete it either. She left the document open on her desktop, a small, unfinished thought, and went to bed, wondering what kind of sister it made her to even consider it. And what kind of sister it made Hannah that the thought had occurred to her at all. The vendor budget Hannah promised never arrived. Instead, over the following 3 weeks, Olivia's phone filled with screenshots. A champagne tower here, a calligrapher's Instagram there, a string quartet Hannah had fallen in love with, without ever asking what string quartets cost in Charleston during peak wedding season. By the first week of April, Olivia had built a working budget spreadsheet anyway, because that was simply how she operated. And she sat across from Hannah and Marcus Reed at a coffee shop on Broad Street with 3 tabs open: venue and catering, florals and decor, and miscellaneous vendors. The total, even at moderate pricing, came to just over $52,000. Marcus, to his credit, went pale. "That's a lot more than I expected." "It's actually a reasonable number for 200 guests in Charleston," Olivia said. "I can find ways to bring it down if you want to cut the guest list, simplify the florals, or move the date to off-season." "We're not cutting the guest list," Hannah said quickly. "Marcus's parents are paying for half, and my dad said he'd help too." "Did Dad actually say a number?" Hannah hesitated, which told Olivia everything. "He said he'd help. He's excited." Olivia made a note. This was familiar terrain. Budgets that existed more as aspiration than commitment. Parents whose enthusiasm outpaced their willingness to discuss actual figures. She had navigated it before with clients. She had never had to navigate it with her own father, whose financial anxieties she'd absorbed as a child, and who, as far as Olivia knew, had never fully recovered the savings lost during the layoff years ago. "Okay," Olivia said. "Then I need real numbers from everyone by next week, or the timeline starts slipping. October is 6.5 months out. Venues this size book a year in advance, and most of the good ones in Charleston are already gone for fall." "That's why we have you," Hannah said, smiling. "You'll find something." Over the next month, Olivia did find something. a converted rice mill outside the city with exposed brick and a courtyard that could hold 200 chairs, available on October 17th, only because of a last-minute cancellation Olivia heard about through an industry contact she'd cultivated over years. She negotiated the deposit down by $800. She secured a caterer she trusted, a florist who owed her a favor, a day of rental company with reasonable rates. She did, in short, exactly what she did for clients who paid her $4,000 to $6,000 in planning fees alone. Hannah's contribution in that same period consisted of vetoing 2 venues for reasons that changed each time she was asked, sending Olivia a Pinterest board with 40 new floral inspiration photos, and asking twice whether Olivia could just handle choosing bridesmaid dresses since Hannah didn't have the eye for it. Sophie, watching the whole arrangement unfold from the next desk over, had stopped making jokes about the invoice. Her expression had shifted from amused to something closer to concerned. "You're spending more hours on this than the Whitfield wedding," Sophie said one Tuesday afternoon, looking at Olivia's calendar. "And the Whitfields are paying you $7,000. "I know. Do you, though? Because you keep saying yes to things you'd never let a client ask for free." It was true, and Olivia knew it was true, but knowing and acting were different muscles entirely. When Hannah called asking if Olivia could personally drive 2 hours to Colombia to pick up a vintage car a friend of a friend was loaning for the getaway photos, Olivia said yes, and lost an entire Saturday she'd planned to spend catching up on contracts for paying clients. When Hannah's future mother-in-law requested an in-person walkthrough of the venue just to be sure, Olivia rearranged 2 client meetings to accommodate it, meetings she then had to apologize for and reschedule, eating into her professional credibility for a woman she'd met exactly twice. There were smaller things too, the kind that didn't register individually but added weight collectively. Hannah texting at 11 at night with a single question, "Wait, did we confirm the cake tasting?" That could have waited until morning, but didn't, because Hannah had never learned to consider that Olivia's evenings belonged to anyone but her. Hannah forwarding emails from vendors with no context, expecting Olivia to simply absorb whatever needed absorbing. Hannah at a family barbecue in late April, introducing Olivia to a cousin's girlfriend as, "My sister, she's planning my whole wedding, isn't that sweet of her?" The word sweet landing like a small dismissive coin tossed into a jar that was supposed to hold something far more substantial. The turning point, the one Olivia would later identify as the moment something genuinely shifted, came on a Sunday in early May. She had spent the morning at the rice mill venue with the florist, mapping out exactly where the hanging installation Hannah wanted would need structural support, measuring ceiling heights, calculating the weight load the existing rigging could handle. It was technical, exacting work, the kind of work that, if done wrong, could result in $2,000 of flowers collapsing onto a head table mid-reception. She'd skipped lunch. She'd torn a fingernail climbing a ladder to check a support beam. By the time she got home, she was exhausted in the specific way that came from caring intensely about something other people assumed required no real effort. Hannah called at 6 that evening. "So I've been thinking," Hannah said without preamble, "and I really think we need a welcome dinner the night before. Like 60 people, at that restaurant on the water Marcus likes. Can you put something together?" "Nothing fancy, just appetizers and stuff." Olivia sat down on her kitchen floor, back against the cabinet, phone pressed to her ear, and looked at her torn fingernail. "Hannah, a welcome dinner for 60 people isn't nothing fancy. That's an entirely separate event. Venue, catering, invitations, RSVPs. I know, but you're already doing all this other stuff, so what's one more thing?" There it was. What's one more thing? as though Olivia's labor were an infinite resource, a tap that simply ran, requiring no maintenance, deserving no acknowledgement, certainly requiring no payment. As though the 62 hours Olivia had already logged, she'd started tracking, almost as an experiment, almost daring herself to look at the number, meant nothing next to Hannah's casual addition of 60 more guests and an entirely new event. "I'll think about it," Olivia said, which was the closest she had come yet to an actual no. "Great, I'll tell Marcus's mum it's happening. She'll be so excited." After they hung up, Olivia sat on the kitchen floor for a long time. She opened her phone and pulled up the document she'd started in March, still sitting untouched in her drafts folder. Magnolia and Oak events, wedding coordination estimate. This time she didn't close it. She started typing. It took Olivia 4 days to finish the document. She worked on it in stolen pockets of time. 15 minutes before client calls, an hour on a Wednesday night after Sophie had gone home, a final stretch on Sunday morning with coffee going cold beside her laptop. Rain tapped against her office window that Sunday, steady and unhurried, and she found something almost meditative in the repetition of the sound while she worked, as if the city itself were giving her permission to slow down and think clearly for once. She approached it the way she approached every contract she'd ever written for a paying client, meticulously, with line items, with her standard hourly rate of $75 applied honestly to every category of work she had already performed and every category she could reasonably project forward: venue sourcing and negotiation, vendor management, budget consultation, floral design and structural planning for the installation. Day of coordination, calculated at her standard 16-hour rate. The welcome dinner, should she take it on, itemized separately. The total came to $11,400. It was not, she told herself, an outrageous number. It was, if anything, a discount. She'd undercounted hours rather than over, left off the gas money for the Colombia trip, left off the cost of the torn fingernail and the cancelled Saturday and the 11 o'clock text that interrupted whatever fragile rest she'd managed to claim for herself. It was simply the truth of what her labor was worth, written down in the same language she used for every stranger who hired her. She stared at the number for a long time before she did anything with it. The push that finally moved her from drafting to sending came on a Thursday in mid-May, during a phone call she almost didn't answer. It was her mother. "Olivia, I need to talk to you about something, and I want you to really hear me on this." Diane's voice had the particular gravity she reserved for moments she considered important. "Hannah mentioned the wedding budget is getting tight. Your father and I can't contribute as much as we'd hoped. You know, things have been tight since his hours got cut at the new job. So I think it would mean a lot if you found ways to bring costs down. Maybe use some of your own connections to get things donated or thrown in for free, the way vendors sometimes do for family in the industry." Olivia sat with that for a moment, turning it over. "Mom, vendors don't donate their labor for free. That's not how any of this works." "Well, you understand the business. I just think, given everything, it would be a real gift if you found ways to make this easier on everyone. You're already so involved. It would mean so much to your sister." There it was, laid bare in a single phone call. The family's complete and unexamined assumption that Olivia's expertise existed to be extracted, that the appropriate response to a tight budget was not to scale back expectations, but to lean harder on the one daughter who could be counted on to absorb the difference without complaint. Olivia thought of Walter's silence at dinner 2 months earlier. She thought of Diane's approving nod when Hannah declared that family didn't charge family. She thought of the word sweet, tossed casually into conversation, like Olivia's labor was a hobby performed out of affection rather than a profession built through exhaustion and skill. She thought, too, of how easily her mother had asked her to call in favors from other vendors, people Olivia had spent years building relationships with, people whose goodwill was not hers to spend recklessly on a wedding that wasn't even her own. "I'll think about what I can do," Olivia said, and ended the call before her voice could betray anything else she was thinking. She didn't think about it for long. That night she opened the document again. She read through every line item once more, checking it the way she'd check any contract before sending it to a client. For accuracy, for fairness, for the kind of clarity that left no room for the other party to claim confusion later. She added a short cover note, professional in tone, the same tone she'd use for any client. A summary of services rendered to date, an explanation of the going rate, a polite but unambiguous request for payment, or, alternatively, a conversation about scaling back the scope of work to something Olivia could reasonably provide as an actual gift, rather than the sprawling, expanding, unpaid second job the wedding had become. She thought about waiting. She thought about softening the language, adding more qualifiers, more apologies, the kind of hedging she'd been taught her whole life to wrap around anything that might make someone else uncomfortable. She thought about her father's silence, her mother's expectation, her sister's casual cruelty dressed up as trust. She thought about how, in 6 years of running her business, she had never once sent an invoice she felt nervous about. Not because the work wasn't worth what she charged, but because strangers, unlike family, had never made her feel guilty for knowing her own value. It was a strange and uncomfortable realization that people who owed her nothing had always treated her more fairly than the people who claimed to love her most. Then she thought about the bride who had told her years ago that people treat your time the way you teach them to treat it. She attached the document as a PDF. She typed Hannah's email address into the recipient field instead of texting it, because email created a record, because email could not be talked over or interrupted or reframed in real time the way a phone call could. She wrote a single line in the body. "Here's a breakdown of the wedding planning work to date and a proposal for moving forward. Let me know if you'd like to discuss." Her finger hovered over send for nearly 30 seconds. Then she pressed it, set the phone face down on the counter, and went to bed without checking it again. She didn't sleep well, but for the first time in 2 months, the exhaustion she felt wasn't the exhaustion of being used. It was the exhaustion of having finally done something difficult and necessary, the particular tiredness that comes after holding a boundary instead of dissolving it. She lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet hum of the air conditioner, and waited for whatever was coming next. Hannah called at 7:40 in the morning, before Olivia had even finished her coffee. "What is this?" Her voice was sharp, stripped of the brightness it usually carried. $11,000. Are you serious right now? Olivia set her mug down carefully on the counter. She had rehearsed this conversation in her head a dozen times over the weekend, and still, hearing the actual fury in her sister's voice landed differently than she'd expected. "It's an accurate accounting of the work I've already done, and the work still ahead," Olivia said. "I used my standard rate. I undercounted hours, if anything. You're my sister. You don't bill family." "I billed for 62 hours of skilled labor, Hannah. I tracked it. I have the documentation. This is insane. You're trying to extort me right before my wedding." The word landed hard, and Olivia felt something in her chest go very still and very cold. "I'm not extorting you. I'm telling you what professional wedding coordination actually costs, because apparently nobody in this family understands that, including you." Hannah hung up. By 9 that morning, Diane was calling. By 10, it was Walter, his voice low and disappointed in the particular register Olivia remembered from childhood, the one that always made her feel she'd failed some unspoken test. By 11, there was a group text, Diane, Walter, and Hannah, with Olivia added almost as an afterthought, accusing her of tearing the family apart over money and making Hannah's wedding about herself. Diane's message went further, suggesting that Olivia had always been competitive with her sister and that this was simply jealousy wearing a business suit. Reading it, Olivia felt something twist painfully beneath her ribs, not because the accusation held any truth, but because of how quickly her family had reached for an explanation that cast her as the problem, rather than examine the pattern that had put her there in the first place. Olivia read the messages standing in her office, Sophie watching from across the room with an expression that had moved past concern into something closer to anger on Olivia's behalf. "They're calling you greedy," Sophie said, reading over Olivia's shoulder, "for doing your actual job." "I know. Do you want to respond?" Olivia thought about it. Thought about every version of apology that rose automatically to the surface. Every old instinct telling her to soften this, fix this, make herself smaller until the discomfort passed and the family equilibrium restored itself, with Olivia once again absorbing the cost of everyone else's comfort. She didn't apologize. Instead, she opened her laptop and began compiling something else entirely, not out of spite, she told herself, but out of the same instinct for documentation and clarity that had built her business in the first place. A timeline. Every text, every call, every favor, dated and itemized, starting from the March phone call through the Colombia trip, through the welcome dinner request that had never even been formally added to anyone's budget. She included the screenshots of Hannah's casual demands, the 11 o'clock texts, the Pinterest board sent without context. She included her mother's request to call in favors from her professional contacts. She included, almost as an afterthought, photos from the rice mill venue walkthrough, her torn fingernail visible in one of them, evidence of the physical labor nobody in her family seemed to register as real work. By the time she finished, the document ran 4 pages, and reading back through it herself, Olivia felt a strange mixture of vindication and grief. Proof, finally, of a pattern she had spent years minimizing, even to herself. She sent the compiled document not to Hannah but to her parents with a single message. "Before anyone calls me greedy, I want you to see exactly what's been asked of me since March, and what I've actually provided. I'm happy to discuss this as a family. I'm not happy to be gaslit about work I can document in detail." The response took 2 days. It was Walter who called first, and his voice, when Olivia answered, didn't carry the disappointed register she'd braced for. It carried something closer to the discomfort of a man being confronted with a pattern he hadn't allowed himself to see clearly. "I read through everything," he said. "Your mother and I both did. I didn't realize how much you'd actually taken on. I think we got used to assuming you'd handle things, because you always have." It wasn't quite an apology, but it was closer to one than Olivia had received from her father in years, and she found herself surprised by how much it mattered, how much the simple act of being seen accurately could matter after months of feeling invisible inside her own usefulness. "I'm not trying to punish Hannah," Olivia said. "I'm trying to be treated like a professional instead of an unlimited resource." "I know. I think Hannah knows too, even if she's too embarrassed right now to say it." The embarrassment, it turned out, took the form of 3 more days of silence from Hannah herself, days in which Olivia continued her client work, continued running her business, continued the life she had built independently of her family's expectations, and discovered, almost to her own surprise, that the world had not ended. The rice mill venue contract still existed. The florist still had the order. Olivia had simply stopped being the invisible scaffolding, holding her sister's wedding together for free, and the structure had not collapsed. It had merely revealed, briefly and uncomfortably, who had actually been doing the holding all along. On the 4th day, Hannah showed up at Olivia's office unannounced, eyes red, the kind of red that suggested crying rather than allergies. "Can we talk?" Hannah asked from the doorway. Sophie quietly excused herself to the back room. Olivia gestured to the chair across from her desk, the same chair where dozens of brides had sat over the years, asking for help building the most important day of their lives. It struck her, watching her sister sit down in it now, how strange it was that Hannah had never once occupied that chair as an actual client, had never once been asked to sit in the position of someone requesting a service rather than someone simply expecting one. "I've been thinking about everything," Hannah said, voice unsteady, "and I think I've been treating you like my plan, not like my sister. Like you were just supposed to be there, doing whatever I needed because that's what you've always done." Olivia didn't speak yet. She let the silence hold the space it deserved. "I'm not saying I have $11,000, Hannah continued, "but I understand now why you sent it. I think some part of me knew it wasn't fair, even when I was asking. I just never had to think about it before, because you never made me." Olivia felt something in her chest loosen, slightly, for the first time in weeks. Not resolution yet, but the beginning of something honest, finally. After months of something that had only pretended to be, they talked for nearly 2 hours that afternoon, longer than Olivia and Hannah had talked, just the two of them, in years. Hannah cried twice. Olivia, surprising herself, did not cry at all. She found instead a steadiness she hadn't expected, the particular calm that comes after finally saying the true thing out loud and discovering the world did not end because of it. "I want to ask you something," Hannah said eventually, "and I need you to be honest. Do you actually want to plan my wedding? Or do you just feel like you have to?" It was, Olivia realized, the first time in this entire process that anyone had asked her that question directly. "I want to help you," Olivia said carefully. "I love you, and I want your wedding to be beautiful. But I want to do it as a professional, doing a generous favor for someone she loves, not as someone whose labor is simply assumed and never acknowledged. Those are different things, even if they look similar from the outside. What would that actually look like?" Olivia had thought about this in the days since sending the invoice, more than she'd thought about almost anything else. "I'll waive my coordination fee as a wedding gift. That's $11,000 of value, which is a real gift, not a small one. But you cover actual costs, the florals, the rentals, the vendor deposits, the same way any client would. And you ask before adding things instead of assuming I'll absorb whatever comes up. And if there's a task that's genuinely beyond what's reasonable for a gift, like driving 2 hours for a borrowed car, you find another way to solve it, instead of defaulting to me." Hannah was quiet for a moment. "That's fair. That's actually more than fair. It's what I'd offer any friend I loved enough to do this for. I just never offered it to you, because I never thought I was allowed to have terms with my own sister." Something shifted visibly in Hannah's face. Not full understanding, perhaps, not yet, but the beginning of it, the kind of recognition that takes root slowly rather than arriving all at once. Marcus, when he heard about the conversation that evening, surprised Olivia by being the one who pushed hardest for accountability within his own circle. He called Olivia directly, something he'd never done before, to apologize for his mother's last-minute venue walk-through request, and to insist that any future asks go through him first, so Hannah and Olivia wouldn't keep falling into the same pattern. It was a small thing, but Olivia noted it the way she noted everything now: who showed up to actually examine their behavior and who simply waited for the discomfort to pass. Diane was harder. She called a week later, her voice carrying less warmth than usual, more wounded formality. "I still think you could have handled this differently. Sending a bill felt very cold, Olivia." "I tried handling it differently for 2 months, Mom. Nobody heard me until I put a number on it." The silence on the line told Olivia that some truths landed even when they weren't fully accepted. Diane didn't apologize that day. But 3 weeks later, at a family dinner Olivia almost didn't attend, her mother asked, for the first time in longer than Olivia could remember, how the wedding planning was actually going for her, not for Hannah, but for Olivia specifically, what it was costing her, what she needed. It wasn't everything, but it was something, a small crack of light in a door that had been sealed for a very long time. Olivia answered honestly, describing the hours, the logistics, the satisfaction of watching a complicated event come together, and for the first time in years, her mother listened without immediately redirecting the conversation back toward Hannah. The wedding itself, when October 17th finally arrived, unfolded at the rice mill venue under a sky the color of brushed steel, early evening light catching the hanging floral installation Olivia had engineered months earlier. Burgundy and gold and eucalyptus suspended in careful balance above 200 guests who had no idea what it had taken to get there. The air smelled of late autumn jasmine and wood smoke from the courtyard fire pits, and somewhere beneath the string quartet's opening notes, Olivia allowed herself, briefly, to simply admire what she had built before the long working day began in earnest. Olivia worked the day in her professional capacity, clipboard in hand, earpiece connected to her day of team, moving through 16 hours of logistics with the same competence she brought to every wedding she ran. But this time, something was different. Hannah had insisted, against Olivia's initial protests, on paying for a day of coordination assistant out of her own savings, freeing Olivia to actually be present as a sister during the ceremony itself, rather than working through it from the back of the room. During the reception, Hannah pulled Olivia aside, away from the noise of the band, and handed her an envelope. "It's not $11,000, Hannah said, "but it's something. A real payment for real work, because you taught me that's what you deserve." Inside was a check for $3,000, not the full invoice, but a genuine acknowledgement, the first real payment Olivia had ever received from her own family for the countless hours of labor she'd given freely over the years. It wasn't really about the money, not anymore. It was about what the check represented. A sister, finally, treating her like someone whose time mattered as much as her own. "Thank you," Olivia said, and meant it completely. Later that night, after the last guests had drifted out and the band had packed up their equipment, Olivia stood alone for a moment in the empty courtyard, looking up at the floral installation she'd spent a Sunday afternoon engineering, structural integrity calculated to the pound, every wire and anchor point checked twice. It had held. Everything had held. The flowers, the timeline, the careful architecture of a day built from genuine skill rather than obligation. She thought about the version of herself who had typed that first line into a blank document back in March, uncertain, frightened of what asking for fairness might cost her. That version of herself had been afraid that setting a boundary would break something irreparable. Instead, it had revealed which relationships could bend towards something healthier, and which ones had simply been waiting, all along, for someone to finally say enough. Driving home past midnight, the city lights blurring gently against her windshield, Olivia felt something she hadn't expected to feel after months of conflict. Peace. Not the easy, hollow peace of having avoided confrontation, but the earned, solid peace of having stood inside her own worth and discovered that the people who truly loved her could meet her there. She thought of Sophie's words from months earlier, the running joke that had become something else entirely, the invoice thing. It hadn't been about punishing anyone. It had been, in the end, about teaching her family and herself what fairness actually looked like, one honest number at a time.